Hey everyone, my name is Darko and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to talk all about cholesterol and the myths about cholesterol. And I'm here with Dr. Jonny Bowden. And Dr. Jonny Bowden has a very interesting story. It's very fascinating for me to have him on the show and tell you guys about cholesterol, because he was never really a health guy for like half of his life, right? And
Yeah.
it's the latter half.
Exactly half, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Yeah. so obviously people don't know who you are. So let's just give them a little backstory. You're an author, you're a speaker, you're now helping millions of people around the world improve their health. And your story is very fascinating. So why don't you just tell us what
I'll tell you what my publicist sends out as the 15-second elevator speech. Ex-drug addict, ex-alcoholic, now a health guru that many people listen to find out how to be healthy and live long and live healthy and be 74 years old, full of energy. So my journey from heroin addiction and alcoholism to this is, I guess, what you're talking about when you say the funny story. I was not always a health guy. I lifted my first weight, stopped drinking alcohol, and stopped smoking at age 38.
Wow.
So for quite a number of years, I was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My profession was, I was a jazz pianist and later a Broadway conductor and musical director. I traveled all around the country with different road companies of Broadway shows. I was fat, I smoked, I was out of shape. I couldn't run around the block without being winded. And I got bitten by the health and fitness and nutrition bug, if you will. I was on the road with a company, and when you do these shows on the road, there's really nothing to do. Once the show is running and it's set and it's good, and you got the lighting is all set up and everything, you just show up at 6:30, 7 o'clock at the theater, and that's all you do all day. So I was bored. And these actors, it's their job to look fantastic. So I wanted to look fantastic. I see them, they're going to the gym, they're eating all this special food. And so one day, out of boredom, I literally said to one of the actors, will you teach me some of this weight stuff? I'd like to lose a little weight. So they took me to the gym, showed me a couple of bicep curls, and I got bitten by the bug. I started lifting some weights. The reaction I had in my body was fairly quick. The interesting thing is when I started eating healthy, and I'm putting that in quotes if you're listening only to the audience, my idea of eating healthy was to be vegetarian. This is 1989, man. I mean, it's like low. What?
That was when I was
born. So we're talking about a time in which fat was completely demonized. Egg white omelets were what everybody would order. I was one of those guys. If the egg white omelet came in and it had some yolk in it, I'd send it back because I was that sure that any cholesterol that I ate was going to give me a heart attack. And that's pretty much how we all thought. And I was not one of these people who saw the light, got healthy, threw away my cigarettes. I was one of those guys who went to the gym, did a set of bench presses, went out, had a smoke, come back and did a second set. It took a long time. It took like over a year for me to really make a lot of changes. And during that time, I really did notice a significant difference. I looked younger. I lost the belly I had. I shaved my mustache, my 70s mustache. And I really started to look bright-eyed and clean and healthy. And I started to feel that way. And so now I'm doing all these shows and traveling around the world. Now I know where every gym in every city is. We check into the Marriott. I'm at the gym in 10 minutes later. I know where the health food, we didn't have Whole Foods then, but we had health food stores where you could get, all this kind of stuff that you couldn't get like in the big grocery stores. And I was on my way, and I really fell in love with doing this. And around 1990, I thought, God, I really love this. I'd like to learn a little more. I mean, I'm learning from reading Muscle and Fiction. We call it over here Muscle and Fiction magazine, Muscle and Fitness, but it's all, it's all nonsense. It's all guys who are on steroids. And the only thing we were doing was learning from that. And there was some good information there, but it wasn't very verified. This guy does 100 reps. This guy does descending sets. This guy does ascending sets. This does alternating days. I didn't really know a lot about it, and I wanted to. So I looked into whether or not there was such a thing as getting a degree in this. I was an educated New Yorker. I may have been on drugs and stuff like that, but I had a master's degree in psychology. I had a degree from NYU. And my first thought was, I want to get a degree in this fitness stuff. How do you do that? And of course, there were certifications for personal trainers. There was the American College of Exercise and the American Sports Medicine. There were lots of them. So I got one. And then I thought, this is great. I want to get another one. And I eventually collected 6 certifications: ACSN, NASM, all the ones here in the States. I don't know if you have them there also, but they're all the ones that do the official certifications. And now I'm got armed with these certificates, but I'm still a musical director. I've never trained a client. I'm in New York doing a show, a rare show in which I'm actually working as a musician in New York, and I see a sign. Now, I don't know if this name will mean anything to you in Valley, but it's the biggest gym in New York. It's the biggest gym in America now. And it was in that time a new gym in New York City, and it was called Equinox. And I see this big sign, Equinox. It's opening September 21st, 1990. I think they're hiring. So I go in, all full of myself, and I go, I'm a trainer, which I was. I was a certified personal trainer. I never had worked with a client in my life, but somehow I connected with the owners, and they liked that I was older than the average trainer. The average trainer, there was like a 22-year-old surfer board, and here I am, I'm 38, and I have a little more maturity, and I could speak a little bit better, and they went, you're hired. You can start on the floor as a floor trainer, inexperienced floor trainer. And I started in 1990. And I worked my way up to becoming the dean of the Equinox Fitness Training Institute, which was really a model for how they train personal trainers all across the country now. I mean, we had biomechanics and we had anatomy and nutrition. And I helped design those courses and worked at Equinox for about 7 years. And at the time that I began, low fat was the religion of fitness. We all believed it, including me. But people weren't always doing well on it. And it was around that time, 1991 or so, Atkins releases the 3rd edition of his book,
right?
The New Diet Revolution, 3rd edition. And a lot of attention was being given to that book. And a lot of our clients who were not losing weight, doing 2 hours on Stairmasters and low-fat diets, they would come to us. They'd come to me and they'd say, I heard this Atkins thing is really good. It's like, my friends have lost weight on it and I'm going to try it. And me and every other trainer would say, you cannot do that. You might lose a couple of pounds, sure, but all that cholesterol and fat, you're going to have a heart attack. You can't do it. Of course, they didn't listen to us, and they did it anyway. And here's where the problem came in for me. They came back and they didn't die. Not only didn't they die of a heart attack, their blood pressure went down and their blood lipids improved. And their triglycerides were dropping. And more importantly, their waistline was shrinking and they were looking good and feeling good and energetic. Now, in psychology, the thing I have a master's in, there's a very basic concept. We should all know about it because it happens to us every day. It's called cognitive dissonance. It's when you have 2 beliefs that can't both be true. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's a constant kind of thing, like someone that you really know very well and that you love. And then all of a sudden you find out that they murdered, they went up to the book depository and shot at people and everyone says, it's not possible. He's a nice kid and he helps me with my groceries. You have these 2 things and you have to make an adjustment in order to accommodate the facts. And the facts, or what we believed at the time, was cholesterol and saturated fat will kill you. Therefore, the Atkins diet will be very bad for you. But we had this other fact, which is these people were coming in and they weren't dying. Not only weren't they dying, they were improving and losing weight. How do you reconcile those 2 things? Now, the only thought that I had at that time is that one of these ideas has got to be wrong. It can't be the people standing in front of me who have lost weight and feeling great. That's right here. Maybe what we were taught about the Atkins diet, maybe what we were taught about saturated fat and cholesterol, maybe that wasn't true. And maybe the way to bring these 2 things into agreement was to say one of them was wrong. And as you probably know, because we talked a little offline before, and you probably dealt with doctors over there, just like I've dealt with doctors over here, they don't move. They don't change their position. So getting them to change from the model that says saturated fat raises cholesterol, cholesterol causes heart disease, therefore we should not eat fat, getting them to change that was a very, very difficult proposition. So here I am wondering if what we were taught was not true. And at that time, I was lucky enough, it was early 90s, and there was a biochemist from MIT named Barry Sears, who, if your audience doesn't know, wrote a very influential series of books called The Zone Diet in the late 1990s. And he was the author of The Zone Diet. And he came to speak to the trainers at Equinox. And he said some remarkable things that changed my philosophy forever. He said, this is not about calories. It's about hormones.
Yeah.
Hormones drive weight gain. Hormones drive weight loss. Hormones pretty much run the show on everything. And food has a hormonal effect. Now, that was the beginning of a 20-year friendship I've had with Barry Sears. He wrote the introduction to my first book, and he's written blurbs on many of my other books. But that concept, food has a hormonal effect, made me start thinking. Now, as I started to question the anti-fat propaganda, sorry, as I started to cancel, stop it. I'm sorry, man, I have dogs. As I started to question that, I was doing a lot of teaching, and I'd begin to question these concepts, and everybody said, he's not even a nutritionist. He's just a personal trainer. How does he know that? He's not a doctor. Now, let me point out to you, Aaron, that I taught this stuff for a couple years when I was teaching low fat, and nobody questioned my credentials. Nobody said, what is he talking about? He's not even a nutritionist. But now that I'm going, wait a second, what you guys are teaching is just not adding up. And there are these studies that go, what does he know? So that is what got me to go back to school.
I see.
So I basically, fast forward, I earned a PhD and board certification by the American College of Nutrition. And at that point they said, oh yeah, now I got the numbers and you guys are still full of it. And now I can prove it. And now I got the credentials to show you. So this began, you know, a lifelong, a career-long search to find out what this true story was about fat and cholesterol. Because why is this important? Because the entire dietary guidelines that were set up in the United States in 1986 and then were transferred all around the world, low fat, high carb, stay away from animal products, those dietary guidelines came out of one thing and one thing only, the fear of saturated fat and cholesterol and their connection to heart disease. If it turns out, now follow the logic, folks, if it turns out that that connection is not true, or that connection is not what we thought, and those things don't cause heart disease, what happens to the dietary guidelines? They crumble like a house of dominoes because they're built on sand. So fast forward, I start writing books. I've written a number of books. And at this time, I had a best-selling book called The 150 Healthiest Foods on Earth, and publishers like sequels, so they made a whole series of 150 most effective ways to boost your energy and 150 ways to stay healthy, you know, to stay healthy longer. And there was a series of about 5 or 6 of them. And they came to me and they said, we have the best idea for the next book in the series, 150 ways to lower your cholesterol. You can find the foods that lower it. And I said, well, I'm probably not the guy to write that book. And they said, what are you talking about? You've got a best-selling series. You're exactly the guy to write that book. And I said, I think the cholesterol theory is bullshit. It's just not true. And the evidence doesn't support it. If you want me to write a book about this, I'll write a book about why cholesterol is not what we think it is and what heart disease really is. They said, oh, that's ridiculous. The entire medical profession believes that cholesterol causes heart disease. I said, yes, I know. At one point, the entire scientific population thought the world was flat. I can't help that. It just ain't true. Much back and forth ensued. And they said, okay, we will let you write and publish this book. This is in the days before everybody published their own stuff. I went to a real publisher with a real catalog, and Barnes & Noble, they had real brick and mortar bookstores. They said, we will publish it, but you have to have a co-author. And he has to be an MD. And not only does he have to be an MD, he has to be a cardiologist. And come to think of it, he's got to be a world-renowned cardiologist, because they would not put their imprimatur on a book that basically they thought was going to give absolutely dangerous medical advice.
Right.
I was going to tell people that cholesterol is not the most important thing to pay attention to. And they wanted some coverage. They said, get us a good cardiologist. I call up my friend, Stephen Sinatra, who is a world-famous cardiologist and who does not believe that cholesterol causes heart disease and does not believe statins are the answer to every cardiovascular or cardiometabolic problem. And I said, you want to write this book with me? He said, sure. And that's how we got to write The Great Cholesterol Myth. And that's the story of how Sinatra and I came together and how that book came to be written. And now, 10 years later, we rewrote it. And when we wrote The Great Cholesterol Myth back in 2012, we were very sure that cholesterol was not the measurement we should be looking at. We were very sure that the test was antiquated, out of date, obsolete, past its expiration date. I will be happy to explain why in a minute. But we didn't know with certainty what we should be looking for. We knew it wasn't cholesterol. There were enough studies showing that of entrances to the hospital in the United States for cardiovascular problems, between 50 and 75% of the admissions had normal cholesterol. We knew it wasn't cholesterol, not the way we're measuring it now. We had this wonderful, amazing study that I talk about in the book called the Leon Diet Heart Study. They take 605 people. They're walking dead. These people are like this close to having a heart attack. They're a mess. And they divide them into two groups. They give them two different diets. And they look at all their markers, all their risk factors. They smoke. They were just a very unhealthy population. And one group got the diet that everybody was recommending in the United States. Low fat, stay away from animal products, don't eat eggs because they got cholesterol, and all that stuff. High carb, low fat, eat that diet. They had a dietitian. The other group was put on the Mediterranean diet, which today is not a controversial diet at all. It's not even considered a high, but it was a lot higher fat than our diet. It was 40% fat. That's what Barry Sears recommended. That's a fairly, for those times, a Mediterranean diet, 40% fat. It's crazy. They stopped the study because the reduction in risk factors and the improvement in cardiometabolic markers was so dramatic in the Mediterranean diet group that they felt it was unethical to continue. Here's the punchline. So you look at these two groups. One has gone from every risk factor you can imagine. They're dying like flies. They're just a mess. The other group now has very low levels of risk factors. They are not dying. They're getting healthier. So you would ask yourself, I'll bet the healthy group, their cholesterol must have plunged, right? Must have really gone down from that high level. No, it stayed exactly the same. They just stopped dying. Cholesterol was irrelevant. And we've known that for so long. And so this is part of what we wanted to really get across when we wrote the new edition. What should we be looking at? It ain't cholesterol. So here's a couple of the things that have happened in the last 10 years. Number one, we have great cholesterol tests now. And they measure all 13 types of cholesterol. There's not two. There's not good and bad, HDL, LDL. That's 1960s medicine. And the only reason they don't change it, I honestly believe, is because they're too lazy. They're stuck in that system. They've got the insurance codes. They've got the medication. They don't want to be, they don't even want to learn about the new tests. Yet these tests are available. I don't know what labs you have there, but we have two major labs, Quest and LabQuest. They both have these tests. They're widely available. All the functional medicine doctors use them, but these people cling to this good and bad cholesterol test, which is equivalent to trying to diagnose people as healthy or unhealthy by knowing if they're short or tall. Now, short or tall it's a metric, But when you can decode the 30,000 genes in the human genome, you're really going to look at short and tall as indicators of health? It's one of 7 million factors. And that's what good and bad cholesterol is. So we now know that there's cholesterol, there's LDL-A, LDL-B, LDL-3A, 3B, 4A, 4B, LP little a, oxidized LDL. There are 13 different types, and they don't all behave the same. And all the HDLs are not good. There's 2A, 2B, there's 3A, 3B. Some of them are inflammatory, some of them aren't. And LDL is a whole cornucopia of stuff. Some of them are fairly innocuous, don't matter much. Some of them, the small, dense, inflamed particles, they do matter a lot. None of this is picked up by the good and bad cholesterol tests. So one of our primary objectives with this book is to retire that test forever, and certainly to tell people to not take a medical prescription that's based on this test. This test, Aaron, and you will appreciate that being born in the 80s. Do you remember the Commodore 64 computers or the Atari games, Pac-Man and stuff was back in the 80s? This is the equivalent of using that for medical testing. When you've got an iPhone 11 and a Samsung Galaxy, and you're going to use the old flip phone, good and bad cholesterol. So cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. The way it's being measured is inaccurate, does not in any way capture all the complexities and subtleties that we now know are in blood lipids. And saturated fat doesn't correlate with the incidence of heart disease. We've got a study from 2010, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2014, Annals of Internal Medicine, British Medical Journal. Zoe Harcum, Dr. Zoe Harcum did her PhD thesis in which she did, let's see what all the health organizations across the world have recommended. United States, they looked at all of them. In Europe, they said, let's see what the science actually supported at that time. And her thesis, which was accepted and published in the British Medical Journal, said there was no scientific consensus on any of this. These were people guessing. They guessed that high fat was bad, and they were wrong, because high fat is actually, when we talk about the hormonal effect of food, high fat is actually the solution to a lot of our metabolic problems.
Yeah, so I guess after you said all of that, which is awesome, by the way, thank you, the question that most people have on their minds, which is what I had on my mind before I found out that cholesterol can cause heart disease, is why is it that every doctor is saying that cholesterol is causing heart disease? Why do we fear having high cholesterol levels, and why do we fear saturated fat? Where does this come from?
It goes back to the 1960s and 70s and a researcher named Ancel Keys. I don't know how deeply you want to go into this. His story has been told many times, but Ancel Keys, well, we're not in the United States, so I can probably say this. Ancel Keys was like a Donald Trump, only in medicine. He had to have his way. He was completely determined that he was right all of the time, and he was a very forceful personality. He wasn't an MD. Wasn't even a PhD in nutrition. He had his doctorate was in eel physiology. I mean, you know, he was a well-known physiologist, but not a nutritionist, not a medical doctor. But he was very influential because he had designed, during World War II, he had designed something called the K rations, named after his name, Ancel Keys, begins with a K, which allowed people to stay in foxholes and stay hydrated and stay and get their nutrition and be able. These K rations allowed them to like live out in the field and survive. So he had a lot of prestige, and he said, the reason Americans have heart disease is because they eat too much fat, and I can prove it. So how did he prove it? Well, one thing, it's come out since in the 40 years of investigations that's been done since this, the Italian government, he loved going to Italy, loved it. He thought it was paradise. And the Italian government said, oh, let's wine and dine this guy. So he goes to Italy, he sees these people are so healthy. They're out there in the sun, they're jovial and happy, and they seem well adjusted, and they're working, and they're physically fit. They're the opposite of what we are in America. He says, they got to be doing something right. And this was encouraged, believe me, by the Italian government, who was like, yeah, tell them it's the health paradise. Tell them all this good stuff. So he kind of created this concept called the Mediterranean diet. Let me tell you how crazy that is. There's 26 countries that border the Mediterranean. You would know this better than I, because you're closer to that part of the world than I am. But there's like 26, Israel, Turkey, Greece, Italy. I mean, there's a million. They don't all eat the same thing. In fact, when we did this book, I actually looked at menus from local restaurants in all these different countries. Plenty of them have meat on it, plenty of them. But what he noticed was they didn't seem to be eating, he thought they didn't eat as much fat. So he makes this chart. It's called the 6 countries. He called it a study. It wasn't. It was a chart of data. And he showed how the countries that ate the least amount of fat had the least amount of heart disease, and the ones that ate the most amount of fat had the most, like the United States. Japan had the least. And there's the 6 countries, and it forms a nice little line, except that there were 22 countries for whom data was available. And when you chart, as it has been done, all 22 on a graph, there's no line. It's scattershot. It's like shooting a shotgun into a bullseye. It's scattered. He chose the 6 countries that made that line. So he goes to the World Health Organization, and they laugh at him. And he was a guy much like Trump. If you laughed at him, he carried that grudge, and he was not going to let it go. And they literally, they said, this isn't science. This is a bunch of correlations between 6. You're not proving that eating fat gives you heart disease. You haven't looked at any of the other conditions or any of the other variables. So he, with revenge, with just fury in his heart, says, I'm going to design a study, and I'm going to show them. And he designed a study called the 7 country study, which is the most influential study that's ever been done in nutrition, the most cited study. And he went to 7 countries, and he gathered data. And sure enough, he found a correlation between fat and heart disease. Now, few things to know about this. Number one, this is what's called an epidemiological study. It's not a clinical study. Clinical study, I go in, I get a bunch of subjects. I match them on important parameters. I'm not going to put 70-year-olds with 30-year-olds. I'm going to match them for age. I'm going to match them for sex. I'm going to match them for fitness levels, for medications that they're on, for previous diseases they may have had. I'm going to make them as close to identical as you can do with people. I'm going to make them kind of equal groups. And then I'm going to put one group on diet A and the second group on diet B. And at the end of the trial period, I'm going to measure something, whether it be cholesterol or lipids or triglycerides or inflammation, or I'm going to measure something and see if the group that got the experimental diet did better or worse than the group that got the placebo or control diet. That's a clinical study. He didn't do that. What he did is the equivalent of a survey. He went around, looked at what people were eating, asked them, what'd you eat for breakfast? What'd you eat for dinner? Put that survey data in, which is the most notoriously unreliable data you could possibly get. And based on that, he said, it looks like the more fat they eat. Now, a couple other things wrong with it. One of the countries that he studied, Greece, the time that he studied it, they were going through Lent. They were going through this period, but for a week they give up meat. So I mean, his data was so bad. It was so contaminated. His own belief system so clearly caused him to have what we call confirmation bias. You believe something's true, you find the evidence for it. So he designs this study, and it has been the basis ever since for our low-fat recommendations. Except that study was done, 4 or 5 decades ago. And since then, we have massive amount of evidence showing that it's just not the case. That you can't use an epidemiological study when you just watch stuff to try to figure out what really causes. You can say that they're associated, they're found together, but you can't say that because they're found together, one causes the other. And then they have had clinical studies, and they have fed saturated fat to one group and vegetable oil to the other. And guess who does better? The saturated fat people do way better than the vegetable oil people. So this is how that got started. And in 1986, there was so much controversy over it that they actually formed what they called a consensus committee. And that consensus committee, if you watch international stuff, it was like the US Congress today. They did not agree at all. But Ancel Keys managed to get his point of view front and center, and they adopted these low-fat guidelines, and we have been paying the price ever since. We are a nation here, I don't know about you, here we are fat, sick, tired, and depressed. This diet has contributed to massive metabolic dysfunction. Over 52% of the people have insulin resistance, which we believe in the book is the prime cause, the real thing that we should be looking at for heart disease. And this diet just has not worked. And as I said in a recent article, I said, would you continue, we're in COVID now, would you use a vaccine that doesn't work? Would you continue to use it? Well, we're continuing to use the low-fat diet. Folks, it doesn't work. Look around you. So what we need to do is to start to go back to what Barry said. How does food affect our hormones? And what we find is the thing that makes people fat, primarily, not 100% of the time, but one of the driving factors is a particular hormone called insulin, which I'm sure you are very familiar with, but if you'd like, I will tell your audience what it does. So insulin's job, its main job in the body, is to get sugar the hell out of the bloodstream. Because when you have a lot of sugar in your bloodstream, bad things happen. And without going into all biochemistry of it, you don't want high blood sugar. So whenever you eat something, you eat an apple or a ding dong or whatever it is, your blood sugar goes up. The pancreas says, uh-oh, his blood sugar went up. Pancreas secretes some insulin. Insulin goes rushing into the bloodstream. Its job is to round up that sugar and take it over to the muscle cells, which are happy to have it in the best of all possible worlds because you're going to exercise. You're going to use those muscles. So of course they'd like insulin to take that sugar into those cells. They're going to need it. Insulin drops the sugar off to the muscle cells, says, have a good time with it, goes back to the pancreas, and after that sugar has been used up by the muscles, you get hungry again. And you start the cycle again. That's how a metabolism is supposed to work. Here's what really happens. You're 30 years old, you wake up, you're full of stress, you run to the local coffee emporium, you eat a low-fat banana, whatever, for 900 calories of sugar. Your blood sugar is on the ceiling. The pancreas says, this is code blue. The guy just ate the equivalent of 12 donuts. Get to work, get to work. Insulin starts coming in, starts rounding up that sugar, but there's a problem. The muscle cells don't want it. Because why? What are they going to use it for? They're not going to stop. They're not going to exercise. The guy is going to look at the computer all day at work, and he's going to home and play with the clicker. The muscles don't need it. So the muscles say, thank you very much, insulin. You and your sugar go elsewhere. This is the beginning of what we call insulin resistance. The cells are saying, no more. We don't need it. We don't want it. We got no use for it. Go somewhere else. So insulin says, well, we got to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. How about the fat cells? Fat cells, hey, we'll be happy to take it. Fat cells open up, insulin shovels the sugar in. Now you're starting to put on weight on your hips and your butts and your thighs and all of those places. After a while, even the fat cells say, sorry, dude, enough is enough. Now you've got high blood sugar and high insulin, the very definition of prediabetes, which is always diabetes. And diabetes is always pre-heart disease. 80% of diabetics die of heart disease. So this starts with a reaction to a high-carb diet, too much insulin, inability of insulin to perform its job. You get fat. Now you have high blood sugar and high insulin. You're on your way to diabetes and heart disease. Now, you would ask yourself, well, what foods raise insulin? I don't want to eat those. So the number one food group that raises insulin the most is carbohydrate. The second is protein, which raises it a little bit, not that much, but a little bit. You know what food group doesn't raise insulin at all? Altogether, folks, fat. Fat has zero effect on insulin. It doesn't raise your blood sugar. Now, I'm not saying if you ate 10,000 calories of it, eventually it might not go up, but basically fat has a zero effect on blood sugar. And if blood sugar doesn't go up, there's no need for insulin to come rushing to save the day, right?
If I eat fat, I won't get fat.
Well, the idea that fat makes you fat is one of the big myths that we talk about in the book. Fat does not make you fat. I eat a ton of fat. You wouldn't believe how much fat and I'm 142 pounds. Fat doesn't make you fat. Carbohydrates make you fat. And it works by the exact mechanism I just described. You eat carbs, your blood goes up, insulin comes chasing in, and after a while, the system doesn't work anymore. When you eat fat, no problem with insulin. So why these people on ketogenic diets, high-fat diets, are doing so well is precisely because of that. They have managed their insulin release. So they're not constantly storing fat. And the other side of that high-fat diet is the body now learns how to use fat. Because when we're eating all this sugar, when we were trainers at Equinox, I don't know about you, when I started my training career, that's all we did. Eat every 2 hours. Keep fueling yourself. You have to eat mini meals. You got to eat 5 times a day. It's bull. It's complete not true.
Yeah.
But we did that because everybody had a sugar-burning metabolism. It's all we ate was these high-carb things. So the body's used to know, it knows how to process that for energy. Meanwhile, these people have all this fat on their body. We all do. We can see it. And it's kind of like having money in the bank and you don't have the ATM code because you can't burn that fat. You got to keep burning the sugar that you're taking in every 2 hours. Well, when you stop doing that, the body says, there's no more sugar. It gets a little upset. You maybe don't feel so great for a day or two. Then it says, wait a minute. I got this ATM code and you got all it. I'm going to go try using some of this fat. And now it learns how to actually burn or metabolize fat. And you become someone with a flexible metabolism who isn't relying on sugar. You could handle sugar if it came down the pipe. You'd prefer fat because there's so much more of it and it's such a more accessible, clean burning fuel. When you have that kind of metabolism, it's not hard to not eat for a couple of hours. It's easy to do intermittent fasting because your body is using the fuel that it was designed to use, which is the fat that you store.
Mm. Right. So I want to clarify some things for the audience watching. So
Please.
Cholesterol, most people don't understand what cholesterol does in the body. So could we just really quickly touch on
Yes.
that, because that's super important to understand.
There's 3 things you need to know immediately about cholesterol. Number 1, you make hormones from it. Number 2, you make vitamin D from it. Number 3, it is needed for the immune system. I could probably go on. It's also needed for memory and thinking. So without cholesterol, you die. There is no human being without cholesterol. You've got to have it. It's a necessary molecule. It's called a sterol. It's a waxy molecule that's used for all kinds of things. It's incorporated into every cell. It's very important for memory and thinking. And part of the reason why it got this reputation as causing heart disease is that one of the many things that causes heart disease is usually what happens is some of that LDL that's floating through your bloodstream will get damaged. And it gets damaged by the same things that age us and damage all of our organs, and that's inflammation and oxidative damage. So now you get this LDL particle kind of been knocked around a bit. And it winds up getting stuck in a parking spot in the wall of the artery where it doesn't belong. And as soon as it's stuck there, more inflammation happens and more oxidative damage happens. And all of a sudden, the cells are coming along, putting calcium on top of it to try to keep the spreading, you can think of it as kind of a sore or a wound, to keep it from spreading, and they're capping it and they're making it into solid plaque. And it starts with this damaged LDL molecule, but what people don't understand is that cholesterol, LDL or HDL, is not a problem until it becomes damaged by inflammation and oxidation. Which
comes from what? What is the inflammation and oxidation is caused by the insulin resistance?
Well, the inflammation can come from many sources. We all have some inflammation. It's a part of every disease, part of every person. The idea is to keep it in balance. So inflammation is not always a bad thing. When you get an injury, let's say you get a splinter or something, and you notice the area starts to swell up a little, that's white blood cells surrounding the puncture wound and trying to work to keep from a microbe from getting in and from an infection starting. So that inflammation is a good thing. We want some inflammation. Temperature, when you have a fever, is part of inflammation. We need inflammation. The problem is, we have about 16 times more in the inflammatory army than we do in the anti-inflammatory army. So inflammation is promoted by omega-6 fats, and it's decreased by omega-3 fats. We need those 2 fats to be in balance. So we have enough inflammation to handle an immune system reaction, not so much that we get an autoimmune disease or we get sick and tired and fat and depressed, and we need enough anti-inflammation to calm that down when it needs to be calmed down. We now consume, ideally, the ideal ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s is 1-to-1. We consume, well, the research depends on where the research is done. Minimally, we consume 16 times more omega-6 than omega-3. In many countries, it's more like 20 or 25 times more omega-6 than omega-3. So that's one source of inflammation. Vegetable oils, the most pro-inflammatory crappy food on the planet. And we've all been taught that they're very healthy. Soybean oil, canola oil, it's all GMO, highly processed stuff. And all it does is promote inflammation and give you no nutrients. So that's one source. There are others, pesticides, pollutants in the air, chemicals, recreational drugs, regular prescription drugs, stress. All of those can cause inflammation. And as far as oxidative damage goes, that's happening every time you breathe, because these are rogue oxygen molecules called free radicals, and they start doing damage. And as long as you have enough antioxidants in your body, which our bodies make antioxidants, and in our diet or in our supplements, you should be able to fight off a normal amount and keep that kind of in the zone. But we don't do any of that. We just eat more oxidating, more inflammatory foods, have more of an inflammatory lifestyle, don't eat the anti-inflammatory things that we need, don't take in the antioxidants that we need. So of course things get damaged. And when LDL gets damaged, just like everything else, it's a really bad thing. But it isn't the cause of heart disease. If you really were looking for the cause, you'd say inflammation and oxidation, because that's what damaged the LDL particle in the first place. So all this concentration on cholesterol is kind of misplaced. If you look at LDL and HDL, they stand for something. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. The other one stands for high density lipoprotein. The lipoproteins are the boats that carry cholesterol. Cholesterol can't be in the bloodstream. It doesn't float in the bloodstream. It has to be packaged, and it's packaged in these things called lipoproteins. And we now know from a lot of research that the number of lipoproteins is far more important than the cholesterol. The cholesterol is the cargo. When you think about it, anytime there's thousands of things around, there's more likely to be an accident, right? If there's a huge crowd, if there's tons of boats in the water, they're more likely to hit each other. So the particle number is the number we really want to know, and that's what the new tests tell us. That will predict heart disease. Not the cholesterol cargo that's being carried by the boats. We don't care if there's a lot or a little. As long as the boats aren't damaged, nothing bad happens. So we need to know the number of boats. That's called the particle test. It's widely available. We need to know the types of cholesterol because they do behave differently in the body. And we need to start paying attention to all the non-cholesterol causing events when it comes to heart disease, like stress and not relaxing and not sleeping well and bad digestion, not getting enough vitamin D, not being out in the sun, not having nurturing relationships with other people in communities. All of these things are factors for heart disease. And yet we're looking at a stupid measurement of good and bad cholesterol that came from 1960, and we haven't progressed past that. And why this matters so much is that this keeps us from looking at the real causes of heart disease. You go into a cocktail party in LA when they still had them, when we didn't have COVID, and say, how's your heart? Everyone says, oh, my doc says my cholesterol is fine. They could be the walking dead. And that's what they think it is, because they're so programmed to believe that that's what matters. And it really is only one factor. And the way we're measuring it, it's an insignificant factor. So that's why this matters. And one of the reasons, Aaron, that I'm so passionate about getting the message of this book out is because of COVID. Think about this for 1 minute. Every precondition that spells disaster if you contact COVID. Prediabetes, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure. They are all cardiometabolic diseases. They have all been contributed to by this cockamamie low-fat diet. If we changed our diet, we would not have as many of those diseases as we have now. And my belief is that COVID's a nasty virus. Nobody wants to get it. But if your immune system is putting out inflammatory fires that are unforced errors every time you're eating crap, and it's constantly trying to catch up with that, and it doesn't have enough vitamin D to do this, and it does, and then now you catch a virus, not a good prognosis. I have said many times, I'm not afraid of COVID. I am not a COVID denier. That's a nasty virus. It behaves differently than other viruses. It does some nasty damage. But here's the thing, 98% of people survive it. I'm banking that I'm going to be one of them. I'm not afraid of it because I think that it's nothing. I think it's very serious. But I have worked for 38 years to fortify my immune system and my organs and my T cells and B cells and all the things that like fight these things off are in pretty good shape. My vitamin D levels are like 60. I think I'll be okay because I'm in a position to be able to fight off challenges. That doesn't mean I will, and I'm not saying I'm invincible. I'm saying that we worry so much about contacting the virus. Most of us probably will contract it. Most of us probably won't know about it because it's asymptomatic in a lot of people. And my point is that if you switch this diet from this cockamamie, crazy processed food, low-fat diet to one that's really healthy and full of good nurturing fats and supports your immune system and your bodily functions, you're in a better place to fight off problems.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's funny because earlier in the interview, you touched on the healthy foods and you put it in inverted commas. And this is one of the biggest problems is when you talk to people and you say, oh, and they say, oh, I'm eating healthy, what that usually means is low fat, you know, high carb, or you just very low protein.
Exactly my point. And it is, I don't know that I'll see a significant change in the medical profession in my lifetime. I hope you will. But it is very hard to get people to change their opinion when their salary depends upon them not changing it. And the fact is there is an entire edifice built on lowering cholesterol. It's a $30 billion industry. There's a national cholesterol education program. There's the statin drugs, the biggest selling drugs of all time. There's all of this geared towards getting people to lower their cholesterol. It's going to be a very hard thing to change.
Yeah,
it will happen eventually.
Sorry, go on.
I'd say I think it will happen eventually. I'm not so optimistic about when.
Yeah. So let's talk about the statins, because this is, for me, I didn't really know much about statins until a year ago. One of my clients actually, he was on a statin drug when we started coaching together, and I told him, like, you shouldn't be on a statin drug. Your cholesterol's fine. You know, the LDL it's a lot more nuanced than like what you were just saying. Like there's 13 different strands of LDL, but his doctor told him that he needs to go on a statin drug. And this guy, for the last 4 years, has had so many injuries, like brittle bones, joint problems, and like recently, the last few months, since we stopped coaching, his joints inflamed to the point where he was, you know, he couldn't really walk properly. And he's lost all of his strength, not been working out, put on weight, and he was really depressed. And then one of his friends referred him to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist looked at his numbers and stuff and said, you should not be on a statin drug. Like, this is the worst diagnosis. And as a result, he's experienced all of these nasty side effects from taking the statin drug. And like you said, the statin drug's multi-billion-dollar industry. So what are statins for people that are watching this and don't know what we're talking about?
There are drugs that lower cholesterol.
Yeah.
They're the most popular. They came into wide use around 1991, and they have been the standard of practice to lower cholesterol. But you have to understand that means that you have to accept the premise that it's very important to lower cholesterol at any cost. Now, here's the thing. Statins do a few things. They lower cholesterol. They also have two mild beneficial effects, one of which is they mildly thin the blood, and they mildly lower inflammation. In my opinion, neither of them, statins don't do neither of those things as well as fish oil does, or a little vitamin E, or a little ginkgo. They all thin the blood a little bit, and they all lower inflammation without side effects. So yes, I will give statins the fact that they have this mild benefit. But the main thing they're known for is lowering cholesterol, and they do that just fine. What they don't do is save lives. And this is what we go through very carefully in the book, complete with the graphs, complete with the data. And we show how the companies often will present that data to sound like it's a much more powerful effect than it is. And we show that even in the cases where a statin drug in one, you had two populations and you gave the statins to one and not the other, and you might have two less heart attacks, two less deaths from heart disease in the statin group, but it's compensated for two more deaths from other things like diabetes or cancer in the non-statin group, in the statin group. So it doesn't save lives, and it's really important to know. They are now doing a huge marketing campaign to say, oh, statins are good for older people too, and they do all these things. what they're finding is that some people are in such bad shape and eat such horrible diets and are so inflamed that even the tiny little bit of blood thinning and anti-inflammation that a statin drug gives is better than nothing. And so they're trying to resell them now. It's like, well, forget about the cholesterol. They're anti-inflammatory and they thin the blood and that's all good. You can do all that without the statins. We were very attacked when the first edition of the book came out for being anti-statin, and I'm not really anti-statin. I'm anti the overprescription of statin. They're giving statins out to children to prevent high cholesterol. So go back to what we talked about earlier. You asked what cholesterol was. I said it's essential for the brain. The brain isn't developed in a child. The cerebral cortex doesn't even come online till you're 25. To give a statin drug to lower this important molecule for brain development to a child is insane. It's never been shown to do any. This is total marketing. There's been a very, very, very small amount of research on statins and women. We don't know what they do with older women, yet we give them out like candy. There's a fair amount of research showing that they're completely ineffective in men over 70, and yet every guy I play tennis with who's 70, 72, they're all on statins. I bring in the study and say ineffective over 74 or over 73, doesn't matter. So we are not necessarily anti-statin. There may be cases where a statin drug might be appropriate. But what they have done, what the manufacturers have done, it's the same thing every manufacturer does. We don't like to know that they do this in science and medicine, but we expect them to do it in other kinds of product development. They try to expand their market. So they got something that this group would benefit from, and they said, let's make it bigger. It doesn't have to be just middle-aged men who've already had a heart attack. What about the ones who haven't had a heart attack? They'll benefit. My audience just went up. What about people who have cholesterol that's 210? Yeah, let's lower the numbers of normality so we can increase our audience even more. You know, the normal cholesterol used to be 240. They've slowly dumped it down lower and lower, and every time they lower it, you get a few million new patients who can be reimbursed. So we're not necessarily anti-statin. We're against overprescription of statins for everybody, for everything. There are doctors who literally go on TV and say, that drug's so good it should be in the water supply. That's how insane it is. And we're also against the use of statins based on the old-fashioned good and bad cholesterol test. I'm a perfect example of this. So I have great normal cholesterol numbers. If you did that stupid old test, good and bad, I come out with flying colors. Finally, when I got wise to this, I got the real test, the particle test, and I was very surprised to find that I have some very high troubling numbers. When you measure it correctly, when you look at total number of particles, mine are much too high. When you look at whether they're small, dense particles, which are not so good, or big, round, fluffy molecules are not harmful, I have a lot of the small, dense ones. So now I'm not taking statins, but I'm taking that particular reading quite seriously. And for someone who has that reading, they might want to consider a statin, but not because you got high LDL. That's like getting an astrology reading from a popular magazine and saying, oh, I need to be on medication based on that. So we are against the overprescription of statins, but some people are probably being underprescribed it because, again, like me, they're looking at the old test, which doesn't tell you anything. So.
Yeah, that's a good point because, you know, I had a blood test and I have elevated LDL, but that's because I eat a lot of saturated fat, right? And I know that, and I feel much better than I used to. So I can't possibly be increasing my risk for heart disease, right?
There was actually a study when I first started researching this back like around 2004 or something like that. I was telling you about the days at Equinox when I was looking at the research and it wasn't supporting what we were teaching these people. And I remember even the researcher, her name was Dreon, D-R-E-O-N, and she did a study in which she did feed people a lot more saturated fat. And she did notice that their LDL went up, but she bothered to check what type of LDL. And she found that LDL, let's just say it comes in two basic categories. One is these small, nasty little atherogenic particles, and the other is the big, fluffy cotton ball molecules. She said, yeah, it went up, but it's all the cotton balls. I'd rather have a LDL reading of 150 and it's all the cotton balls than a reading of 94, which my doctor's happy about, and it's all the nasty ones. You don't want the nasty ones. But if you don't look at that, you go, oh, saturated fat raises cholesterol. Yeah, but it's raising a type of LDL that's essentially harmless. And it's reducing the type of LDL that you should care about.
Yeah.
So
just to clarify for everyone watching, the HDL LDL test that your doctor is probably issuing right now is
absolutely,
it's outdated.
Absolutely.
And you can't directly tell a causal link between the LDL number and your
not at all
heart disease.
You are 100% right. You said that very well. And if people doubt it, we put in the Great Cholesterol Myth, the revised and updated edition. Every one of these scientific studies is cited. There are links to the PubMed, to the publication online in the National Institute of Medicine library. These are all published studies. We didn't make them up. They're there for reference. You can show your doctor. Sometimes they listen, most times they don't. But I have had people write to me, doctors write to me, and thank us for writing that book, thank me for writing the book Living Low Carb, which I wrote before that, and saying this really opened my eyes. I did not know this. There are doctors who are willing to change their opinions when they're confronted with the new science, but most of them won't even look at it.
And the reason why most of them won't look at it is because of what you said earlier, cognitive dissonance, right?
Kind of. I mean, they've been operating this way for a long time. Everything is sort of set. They got the codes. They got the prescriptions. In America, they spend about 7 minutes with a patient. They're just this kind of level of detail and paying attention to this stuff underneath the hood, like the different types of cholesterol and other risk factors that predict heart disease much more effectively, like the number of particles or the ratio of triglycerides to HDL. These are really important markers that can tell you something. Insulin resistance can be measured, and I think it's one of the most important markers of all, and doctors rarely look at it.
Right.
So we talk about all that in the book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Like all of these questions I'm asking you are just covered in the book, right?
Please, I'm enjoying this so much. You're such a smart interviewer and you've got all this information.
Thanks.
And I hope you're asking for your audience as well, because so many people are confused about this. And how do you really explain this when, I mean, some of it's tricky. It's 13 different types of cholesterol. It's much easier to think there's two and one's good and one's bad. Just doesn't work like that, you know?
Yeah. It's funny because I'm experiencing the same, one of the main reasons why I got you on here is because I'm experiencing the same issues that you experienced when you were telling everyone that, you know, cholesterol is not bad. And everyone was like, dude, what are you talking about? You're crazy.
Yeah.
So adding to that, let's talk about, so what are the tests that people can take? So we've established.
Well, I'll give you one I really believe this is not one we probably get a lot of doctors to do, but there's ways to do it anyway. And it's a test for insulin resistance, which is, as I said in the beginning, the condition in which the cells stop listening to insulin when it's trying to shovel sugar into them for energy, and it leaves them in the bloodstream and you're screwed. That's insulin resistance. Well, there's a test for that. There are actually 4 tests for that. You can go to a doctor and ask for an LPIR test. A LabCorp makes an insulin resistance test. They're probably not going to order it for you because it's either not covered by insurance, they never heard of it, they don't know about it. Okay, there's other ways to do it yourself. There's a low-tech way that doesn't cost anything, that is about 95% accurate, and you can do it at home, and I'm going to tell you how to do it right now. You're going to love this because you're a trainer. You stand in front of your wall.
That's fun.
You know where I'm going with it? You stand in front of the wall, you walk slowly towards the wall. If your belly touches the wall before your nose, 98% chance insulin resistant. You can also get a fasting insulin test, which your doctor may give you. It's not expensive. Gives you fasting insulin. Your fasting blood glucose will always be on your blood test. That's a basic standard. If you have any blood test, it's going to have blood sugar first number. You take the fasting insulin number and the fasting blood sugar number, and you go online and you look for what's called a HOMA calculator, HOMA. It's like a BMI calculator. Like in the BMI calculator, it's a very complex algorithm. You put in 2 numbers, your weight and your height, they figure it out, they tell you. With the HOMA calculator, it's a insulin resistance model, much like BMI. You plug in your blood sugar and this new test you just got for $50, the fasting insulin, and it will give you a very good number and where you are on the scale of insulin resistance and whether you need to be paying attention to it. Most people do. So there's other ways to get that besides ordering the actual blood test. You can just get you can do the walking into the wall test, or you can do the fasting insulin test. These are important. We talk about lots of others. There's a million genetic markers now. I mean, it depends on how deeply you want to go into it, but there are lots of tests that are better than HDL and LDL. And you just need a doctor who's not looking at lab values, but is looking at you as a patient, as a whole person, not just your risk factors, but what about the things you do that are good? You know, I look at health as a bank, and I think that there are things we do every day that make withdrawals from the health bank, and there are things we do every day that can make deposits. And the trick is not to make no withdrawals. The trick is to make more deposits than you make withdrawals. So if you eat a crappy meal with a lot of sugar, that's a withdrawal. But you take your vitamin D, you get your exercise every day, you eat mostly good, that's a big deposit. And it works kind of like that. So I don't think it's an either or thing. I think it's more a matter of finding balance between what our bodies were really meant to eat, meant to fuel on, and maybe some recreational eating or a few things that we do. We have a night out in the town, we get drunk, okay, whatever it is, it's a little bit of a withdrawal. But on balance, if you can just keep that balance in the black, I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I like that analogy. That's really good. Yeah, it's like the balance, right? Because, for example, a lot of people think that health specialists like yourself and myself, that they think that we don't eat like any sugar at all, ever.
Oh, dude. I mean, I know that there are people who are very fanatic about that, but almost all the ones I know, of course they do. The question is how much, what percentage of your life is spent eating that way? What percentage of your life is spent sitting on the couch eating bonbons and watching soap operas? And what percentage is doing the stuff that is making strong, healthy deposits into your health bank? And the trick is not to have no fun. The trick is to make sure that you're building a good savings account in that health bank of yours.
Yeah. So now we've established how to find out if we're insulin resistant. So let's say if I walk into the doctor's tomorrow and I say, hey, I don't want to do this HDL, LDL thing. I want to find out the particle size.
You asked for the particle test. The particle test that has different names, NMR, lipoprofile. I mean, there are different companies have different names for it. It is the particle test. Basically, the particles are the LDLs and the HDLs. Those are the boats that hold cholesterol. You want to know how many you have. That's the basic test. It's very important.
Awesome.
Much more effective than the old-fashioned test.
Yeah. And they can get that at Quest and Lab, right? Quest
and LabCorp, yeah, both of them have it. I also wanted to, if we have one more minute, to end with one of the points that we make in the book is that heart disease really is not just about diet and exercise.
Yes.
We touched on this before. Is I can see talking to you, I can just see from your eyes, your focus, your energy, your light, your ability to concentrate, that you connect with people. That is a huge part of heart disease prevention. And you look at these blue zones where people live these long lives into their 90s, and they're all connected to other people. They couldn't find one blue zone. They find different diets, different temperatures, different lifestyles, can't find one where the people aren't really connected, where they don't do social things, Sunday night dinners together, gardening together, square dancing, whatever it is. But you cannot be fully human and you cannot be fully healthy in isolation. And we do not give that enough importance when we talk about preventing heart attacks. It's just as much about the relationships you form, the communication that you have, the community you belong to, the outdoors that you live in, and all of those things that make you satisfied and happy, and they are essential to preventing heart disease. And we can't make this just about a lab test and a diet and how many minutes you do on the Stairmaster. It's because that's not what it's about.
Right, absolutely. And that is so often missed in this health and fitness industry, you know, especially for the fitness industry. That was just all I was focused on at the start was, you know, nutrition and workouts. But there's way more health.
You're so right, Aaron. And what I have noticed, you know, I've been doing this now a few decades, is that all the health and wellness professionals, you, me, all the ones I admire here in the States, all the ones I talk to, I do a lot of interviews, every single one of them doesn't even want to hear about diet and exercise anymore, because they have figured out that this is not about managing calories. It's not about the percentage of protein and fat. It's about your digestion and your sleep and your general health and your level of relaxation and your blood pressure and all the things that you and I are talking about right now. And they know that that's where the action is. And sure, diet matters. Of course it does. I'm a nutritionist. I think it's the foundation of everything. You do what you do. You must believe exercise is one of the founding principles, but it's not the only one. And that's what I guess I want to tell people, is that even if you can't exercise, even if there's always something that you can do to improve and feel a little bit better than you do now. And that's really, I want to empower people to do that, because even a 10% improvement, I have a dear friend who has MS. It's not fun. But he's done those little 10% so that he's 10% less miserable than he would be if he didn't do them. A little bit more energetic, a little bit more involved, a little bit more engaged. And imagine if you didn't have a debilitating disease like that, and you just took 10% more responsibility for getting that bank account in the black. Wonderful things can happen.
Yeah. And I have couple more questions just to finish. But I just want to touch more on Dr. Steve Sinatra, because it was very interesting when I was reading the book, his background and how he came to change his position on heart disease was when
he was
patients with normal levels of cholesterol die a few days later of heart disease or have a heart attack, right?
Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. Steve was a presenter, an educator for a lot of the big drug companies. He would give lectures to other doctors telling them how wonderful statins were. So he knows, just like I knew what the low fat mantra was because I lived it, he lived statins are God. and he came out of it going, dude, just not the case. It's great marketing, but there's a lot. And we're not saying that everyone should throw away their statins. Some people do need them. What we're saying is that let's look a little deeper into this notion that we have this horrible disease. Let's just take a pill. It's all done. Because that's not how statins work. They just don't. It's more. And I think Steve knows that. Steve also has training in psychology. He was a psychotherapist at one point, and he's very cognizant of how the interpersonal aspect affects all these things. He told me one story once, which is really worth mentioning, about a banker who was just metabolically under just the worst, every condition you can imagine, just a mess. And he had a really stressful incident at the bank one day, and he dropped dead of a heart attack. And he used that example to explain that when you're metabolically weakened by all these things that we talked about, insulin resistance, high triglycerides, low vitamin D levels, you're not getting enough nutrients, your coenzyme Q10 is low, whatever it is, when you're weakened like that, something comes along that possibly you'd be able to shake off. But it's the straw that broke the camel's back, because you're metabolically broken. You get this little thing, like a stressful event at the bank, bam, you're dead. So we have to realize how important stress can be as a triggering event for this. Just like the virus, COVID, to come full circle, can be a triggering event for some terrible things. But, I always use the example of a hurricane. Like, we have lots of hurricanes and wildfires and all this stuff out here. And a hurricane can hit the coastline, and there'll be like 10 houses, and it's going to knock a few of them just out to the ocean, right? It's just going to destroy them. But there's going to be a few that are going to be left standing. It's the same hurricane, but some houses were built stronger. They have bigger foundation. They have a stronger foundation. They have a more concrete foundation. They're reinforced. And it's kind of like that with our bodies. I'm not saying if we take care of ourselves, nothing bad will ever happen. Cancers happen. Things happen that are beyond our control that we didn't cause. But we don't have to have unforced errors. We don't have to put ourselves in this metabolically weakened position with this low-fat diet and chasing cholesterol numbers and ignoring all the things that really make us healthy. So all I'm suggesting, my message is only build your own house. You can't control the virus. You'll probably contract it. Why not build your resistance so that you're better able to fight it off? Whether it be that, the stress that the guy dropped dead up at the bank, a virus, build that, and we know how, you know how to do that. I know how to do that. Our mission is to teach other people how to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, and the cholesterol is helping boost our immune system.
Absolutely part of the immune system. There's no question.
Yeah.
No question at all.
And we don't have to fear saturated fat. And that's
Not
actually
at all.
help improve our cholesterol and our hormones.
If I had some butter right here, I'd eat it for you just to like do a demonstration. No, we don't have to avoid saturated fat. I'm not saying it's the only, I mean, we need monounsaturated fat like olive oil and omega-3s like fish oil, but we certainly do not have to demonize this entire, group of fats, which really don't do the things that we thought they did.
So what you're saying is I can eat red meat? I can eat red meat every day?
I do eat red meat every day, just about. But I eat grass-fed.
Yep.
And when it's grass-fed, and this is important to know because fat is where mammals store their toxins. So if you eat a cow that has been horribly raised in a pen, fed antibiotics because they get sick on grain, which is not their normal diet, so they get even sicker and they have to have even more antibiotics. They're in close quarters. They're fed bovine growth hormone. They're fed steroids. Where's all that wind up? In the fat of the meat. If that was the only kind of meat available, I'd become a vegan, and I'm very far from a vegan. The point is, if you get grass-fed meat, organically raised, none of those toxins are there. They don't wind up in the fat. When I go to the farmer's market, they say, "You want lean grass-fed?" I said, "I don't care. Give me the highest fat content. There's nothing to be afraid of. If I'm eating factory-farmed crap meat from the grocery store, you damn right I'm going to eat the lowest fat version of it because it's not healthy food, and I don't want more of the toxins." So yes, the animal products have been demonized, and some with good reason because of the horrible ways that we factory raise farm animals and the horrible way they're treated and the horrible things that they're shot full of and the terrible diet that they eat and the way that they're packaged and processed. Yeah, it's terrible, but it's not the only kind of meat available. If you look a little extra, I'd rather people ate one good grass-fed steak a month than 6 meals at McDonald's a week.
Right. Yeah, well said. And what about genetics and cholesterol? Like some people
Absolutely.
Can I be at risk for heart attacks because my parents had, bad cholesterol?
There is a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia. It runs in families. It is genetic. It affects maybe 1 in 500 people, and it is wildly high cholesterol that happens regardless of what you eat. And if you have that, that's a little out of my pay scale. I would suggest that is something you want to talk to a functional medicine doctor about. There are different approaches to that, but understand that that is less than 1% of the population. That is not the high cholesterol you and I are talking about when you go and you get, oh, my LDL's up, here's a statin. We're talking about off the charts numbers that don't respond to anything. And there are different ways to approach it. It's out of you need a cardiologist and you need one who knows functional medicine and nutrition. But that's a very small percentage of the population. It's not what we're really talking about.
Right. Okay. And last two questions. Can you eat too much eggs? Can you eat too much bacon?
I would guess the answer is probably yes, but we don't have any evidence of that. I mean, I go under the assumption there is almost no substance or no food on earth that you can't eat too much of. You can die of too much water. You can die of too much oxygen. It's just really rare. Yeah. And it's not really something like you work with clients all the time. What's the bigger concern, that they drink too much water or they don't drink enough? I mean, how many people have you seen where you go, you got to cut back on that water. It just isn't that. So it's kind of the same thing. There haven't been any real clinical studies with people eating 20 eggs a day. There is one case study in the New England Journal of Medicine of a guy who ate 20 eggs a day and nothing happened. But we don't really have studies of that. I think the common sense thing is that too much of anything is probably not good. But then you get into the impossible to define what is too much. One person's too much is upset. One person has a certain level of interest in something or taste for a food, and everyone else who doesn't have that thinks, oh, they're crazy, they're obsessive, they're over the top. But for someone like that, that's my hobby. I love that stuff. That's not too much. Golf or sailing or tennis or whatever it is. So It really kind of depends. I mean, I went through a phase when I ate bacon for breakfast every single morning. I don't do that anymore, but I eat it occasionally. And I think when you have a nice, flexible kind of a playlist of foods, good things, you just vary them. I don't worry about the percentage or how much I eat of each thing each day. I just got these 13 or 14 things. They're all great, and I just eat them. And I don't really worry. Sometimes I don't eat in the morning. I don't eat till 2 or 3 in the afternoon. Other days I eat an early breakfast. I vary it a lot, and I think all of those things can be part of a healthy life if the stuff that you're eating is really, really good.
Absolutely. I agree with that. So what can we do? I mean, you're 74 right now?
I am, next month.
Yeah, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You look amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're 74 next month.
I am.
Your book's coming out. When is your book coming out?
October 20th.
October 20th.
You can pre-order it now. Yeah.
You can get that on Amazon.
And please make sure to tell everybody they still have some of the old cover, the black cover. It is a great cover. It is new. It says new and updated. That's the one you want.
Awesome. Yeah, and I can vouch for that. It's an amazing book, and it's going to really open your eyes to everything about.
Thank you so much, man.
We've been told about health. So what can we do finally to maintain a healthy heart for decades, just like yourself?
I don't think it's one thing. I really don't. I mean, I think it's a combination of many things, and I go back to the bank account thing. I mean, for example, I play tennis every day. 5 or 6 days a week. Every weekday I'm on the court 7:30 or 8. I play for a couple hours. Some days 6 days a week. I have an incredible relationship with my fiance that's filled with passion and excitement and interest. I have dogs, as you've heard. I'm sorry about that I love and that, I spend time with. I live in a, to me, gorgeous area of Los Angeles where I'm looking out at a garden and greenery and sunshine, and I walk in it, and I have a lot of really close friends, and I eat really good food, and I take a lot of supplements, and I'm really basically happy. And I make sure I monitor my sleep and that I get the right amount. I have an Aura ring, so I actually monitor all the sleep parameters, and I pay attention to those things. And I don't take it too crazy or too hard, and I don't take things too seriously. And I'm very grateful. And I think I meditate twice a day, 20 minutes. And I think all those things together, I can't point to one of those and say, that's what you do. Because even if that was the thing, it would only be the thing for me. It wouldn't necessarily change your life. But there will be things, everyone listening to this can find their own little playlist of things. Mine is tennis and a relationship and my dogs and my outdoor life and all of that. But everyone can find things like that, and they just have to honor those things and realize how important they are for their serenity and for their well-being, and then just honor them and take in more of them, whether it be good food, good people, good relationships, good contributions, good pets. And that's the only, it's not a secret, and I don't even know if it works for everyone, but it's the formula I've used, and it's worked for me.
I love that. That's beautiful. That is a great formula, I think. I mean, that's a holistic approach to health, and I love that. That's the message that people need to hear.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
It
was a great interview. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed you having me on. I so appreciate that you invited me. Yeah, I hope I have new friends in Bali, and if I ever get to go over there with my dear Michelle, we would love to meet some of you. So I will look you up. You can be sure of that.
Awesome.
All right, my friend.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for, hopefully this interview is going to change a lot of people's lives,
I hope so.
Expanding their context.
Thank you for the opportunity and for the invitation. I do appreciate it. It's been an honor. Take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.